Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Mirëmëngjes.
All had a nice evening last night and are ready to work again this morning. My name is Dragica Martinovic and I'm the member of the ESC since 2013. I come from Croatia and I will be moderating the first panel of today. Before we start, I would like just to announce that we have our draft declaration just there behind this door on the entrance, so you can take it and have a look, and we will be adopting this declaration at the end of this morning. Today's panels focus on the contribution of social partners and civil society organizations to implementing the European Pillar of Social Rights, with the first of two panels dedicated to jobs and skills. In the EU and Western Balkans, social partners and CSOs are key to reform, quality jobs and skills development. They shape policy, promote fair work, deliver training and support the pillar's goals. On our panel, we have distinguished guests and that will address the key issues of today. One speaker will be addressing us via video message and one via video link. Now, before I introduce the first speaker of this morning, I would like to open the Slido question. So if you can open the question, the first question, and the QR code you can find on your program if you do not have it already. So please take time and give your opinion on these questions, on this question. Our first speaker today is Roxana Minzatu, who will address us via video message. Ms. Roxana Minzatu, European Commission Executive Vice President for Social Rights and Skills, has a strong background in public administration, EU affairs and civil society, having served as an MEP, Romanian minister, and has also worked in civil society and local government. If you can now put the video message of Ms. Minzatu, please. Yeah. Okay.
Good morning. Dobro jutro. The title of this 10th edition of the Western Balkans Civil Society Forum says it best. Socioeconomic convergence with the EU is not a bureaucratic exercise. It's not about ticking a box on the accession process. It is about raising standards of living and about improving the lives of the people in that region. And that is why it is so important that the Western Balkans align their labor markets and their social protection systems to the European Pillar of Social Rights. This pillar is our driver for a Europe that stays true to its unique social model. Civil society and social partners are essential to turn the principles of the pillar into a reality on the ground, especially when it comes to providing opportunities for training, for retraining, when reaching out to young people, to women, and disadvantaged groups. Your work really is one that makes a great difference. And the Commission, European Commission, is absolutely there to provide concrete support. Through the Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance and the Economic and Investment Plan, we are funding projects that create jobs, that improve education, improve trading in the region. Montenegro's ambition to join the European Union by 2028 is an encouraging signal. Meeting this goal will require sustained progress, especially on decent jobs, on equal access to opportunities, and on skills development. The road to the European Union membership can feel impossibly long and sometimes complex. I am Romanian and I should know. Talk about completion of chapters and the EU acquis, that sounds very complicated. But ultimately, we all know that EU membership is about becoming part of a common European family, a strong family. And this is a journey that is about the people. And for this journey to succeed, strong social rights and policies are as essential as are economic and political reforms. This forum is a space to exchange experiences, to coordinate efforts, and to strengthen our cooperation. So thank you for everything that you do. Let us keep working together and ensure that every step towards the European Union brings real progress for the people. I wish you a very productive discussion.
After this optimistic message of Ms. Minzato, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Naida Nisic, Montenegro's Minister of Labor, Employment and Social Dialogue. Ms. Nisic brings strong legal and public policy experience, focusing on labor rights, social dialogue, and the promotion of inclusive policies aimed at improving the quality of life of Montenegrin citizens. Ms. Nisic, I would like you to tell us how does Montenegro involve social partners and civil society in implementing the European Pillar of Social Rights in the Western Balkans? I'm sure also that you will tell us about something about Chapter 19 and about the reforms still that need to be implemented on the, for example, on the employment agency, and how the future use of the European Social Fund to boost the participation of social partners and their accession to the fund's European Social Fund. So, Ms. Nisic, you have the floor.
It's a pleasure to be at this very important conference, and I wish to greet all the participants. I'm grateful for invitation. I will present some of our positions. Ministry of Work. You're quite right. We cannot talk about all this without talking about Chapter 19 and Chapter 2. We are aware that aligning Montenegrin legislation with the EU acquis is intensive process. And what I have to say, it relates to our ministry and the government of Montenegro, that alignment with the negotiating Chapter 19 is happening in cooperation with our social partners. What I would like to underline is that in Montenegro we have two representative trade union federations, and we have one employers association, which at this point in time is representative, verified. This is the Union of Employers of Montenegro, and they are our closest partners. I do apologize for talking a little bit faster, so I will slow down a little bit. What I would like to underline is that setting up working groups our ministry is inviting our key partners, which are our social partners. On top of that, we have representatives of the civil society, a lot of NGOs who are responding to our open calls for drafting laws, strategies in the area covered by my ministry, Ministry of Labor. I have to say that we are proud of the things we have done recently in terms of aligning our national legislation with the acquis. We are working intensively to prepare all the necessary documents to close the Chapter 19. Big thank to International Labour Organization for their support, also European Commission, EU delegation to Montenegro, because they are helping us to meet all the deadlines before us. So we have the labor law, then occupational safety law. These are the two key laws that should be aligned with the acquis, and also the law on strike and the law on representativeness of trade unions and employers association. When it comes to the labor law, labor law is sent to the European Commission for approval when it comes to the transposition of directives. At this point in time, this labor law should be aligned with 2 directives and 1 framework decision regarding the remote work. We hope that we're going to get the reply from the Commission very soon. And the working group is still working on aligning our labor legislation with additional 2 directives, the remaining ones. And after all these changes, our labor legislation, that is to say labor law as an umbrella document, will be fully aligned with the current acquis. The way I see social dialogue and our social partners is like a corrective factor. They are participating in everything we do when it comes to adopting key decisions, especially decisions affecting employers and employees. I have to underline that in the past, all the decisions adopted by my ministry were actually approved by the social partners through the social dialogue. Social dialogue is based on tripartite basis. We have a law on social council, and within social council we have the different social working groups, and we have a very intensive cooperation. Since last year, the Ministry of Labour has Directorate for Collective Bargaining and Social Dialogue, and I think when it comes to our communication, it's very intensive, but we have to be realistic. Communication can always be better, and in this respect we are quite open to fix things and improve them. So this, what I just said, relates to the Chapter 19, but besides the Chapter 19, the Ministry of Labour and Social Dialogue, although not directly coordinating Chapter 2, but out of 7 closing benchmarks, 5 are the competence of the Ministry of Labour. So we have a role to play. Chapter 2 is coordinating. So this relates to Chapter 19. I apologize. So we are coordinating Chapter 2. Sorry. I also have to say that we are intensively working on aligning all our laws with the European acquis, and I hope by the end of this year, at latest during 26, we will have all national legislation aligned with the acquis, and we won't have any problems in this respect. What you ask about civil society I perceive as a corrective factor for the work of the government, and in the upcoming period we will try, our ministry and the government as a whole, to include social partners and civil society in our decision-making process, although in the formal process of decision-making they are participating already. So I would close now. I hope I gave you some basic information. Actually, a couple of more things. When it comes to the employment agency has undergone a process of digitization. 2 months ago, we adopted the law on mediation on the rights of unemployed persons, and through this law we have enabled digitization of the employment agency, and this will be for the benefit of our unemployed persons, but also all the employers who are using the services of the employment agency. And now I would give the floor to other panelists, and I'm ready to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nisic, for this comprehensive overview of your activities and huge tasks that are ahead of you and that you're already doing, things that you're already doing now. I would like to announce our next speaker.
English, but I will continue in English. Our third speaker is Oliver Röpke, is the president of the European Economic and Social Committee. Oliver is president of our committee since April 2023 and member of the committee since 2009. He has led the workers group and contributed to key policy work on employment and social policy. Mr. Röpke strongly supports EU enlargement and the involvement of social partners and civil society in this process. He has launched a project involving, you have been talking about it yesterday already, involving candidate countries in the ESC activities, making it the first EU body to offer such inclusion. Now, Oliver, I'm sure you will tell us more, and you will also tell us how can the Western Balkans be more involved in the pillar implementation, and how can we at our committee support this. Oliver.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dragica, dear Minister Nisic, dear Naida, dear Pilvi. It's really a pleasure to discuss with you second time for me here during this Western Balkan Civil Society Forum, this important topic, because as you said, Dragica, the European Pillar of Social Rights and fair working conditions, I'm convinced that this is not only a legal or an economic issue, it's really a question of credibility for our European project. And therefore, the whole committee was a steadfast supporter of the European Pillar of Social Rights since its proclamation 2017, and we issued not only a lot of opinions how to implement the pillar, but we were actively involved in a number of initiatives of the European Commission. So I think it's an excellent opportunity to discuss also the meaning and the importance of the European Pillar of Social Rights for the enlargement countries and especially for the Western Balkans, because since 2017 this pillar has really served as a compass for strengthening the social dimension of Europe. And I think the 20 principles, although they are not legally binding, I think they have proven that they guided the European Commission and the European Parliament and also the Member States to implement these principles in tangible results in Member States. And a lot of things and points have been mentioned also by the Minister, but I think we had in 2021 an excellent opportunity with the action plan, how to implement this European Pillar of Social Rights and the different targets. Of course, we welcome them, the increasing of the employment rate to 78% at least, also to the point that at least 60% of all adults should engage in training every year, and to lift 15 million people out of poverty and social exclusion. However, we believe that even if we reach these targets, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And therefore, we welcome the announcement of a new action plan to further implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. We have also received an invitation from the Portuguese government to participate in the Porto Social Forum in September, where I think next steps in the implementation of the action plan should be discussed. And in our committee, we are working on an own initiative opinion with our demands how to implement, how to draft this new action plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. This opinion will be debated and adopted in our next plenary session in June. And we believe also in this opinion, although it's not yet adopted, but I can tell you that we believe especially 3 points should be strengthened and tackled in this action plan. The first thing is really to reinforce the right to quality employment to all. So this is our first point. We think that we need a new set of principles, how to make sure that decent work for everybody should be ensured in the European Union. And we think that this goes beyond fair pay. Of course, fair pay and decent wages are I would say, the fundamental of decent work. And we welcome very much the introduction of the Minimum Wage Directive, especially to strengthen social dialogue and collective bargaining in many member states. And in this respect, I think I mentioned it yesterday, I had the pleasure to discuss with some members of the Social Council of Montenegro, and I think this is an excellent news what the minister said, that when drafting new laws that you rely also on the social partners and on their agreement. I think this should be the way forward, and this is also what is behind this minimum wage directive. Therefore, let me say I hope very much that this minimum wage directive will be confirmed by the European Court of Justice, since we have a pending court case in this respect. But we think that rights on paper must be translated into practice. So we must close the gaps that still exist, for example, when it comes to undeclared work, discrimination, lack of access to training and career advancement opportunities. The second point, we are particularly attentive to the situation of vulnerable and marginalized groups, young people, older workers, persons with disabilities, migrants, and those in low-paid or insecure jobs. So as building a European Union of equality, justice and fairness is one of our core priorities, we advocate for targeted measures to ensure that everyone has a fair chance to participate fully in economic and social life. And let me also emphasize that I'm pleased to share the stage, even if it's online, with the president of the Roma Foundation, Mr. Jovanovic, and I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the work. Just recently, the question of marginalized and discriminated Roma communities was discussed in the EBSCO Council, where I had the pleasure to participate and where I could also present the positions of the European Economic and Social Committee, because while the Roma are the largest ethnic minority in Europe, they remain one of the most deprived and socially excluded groups. So we think that this action plan should also focus very much on, especially on these vulnerable groups. As I said, good pay, decent pay is the precondition for decent work, but of course the concept of decent work goes beyond, and I was pleased that the representative of the ILO yesterday mentioned also the initiative for a Global Coalition for Social Justice, and the ESC was one of the first, or even the first EU institution that joined this global coalition. So I think this is also a very good opportunity to look beyond the European Union and to make sure that these principles should be ensured globally. But when I say it's good working conditions, doesn't mean only decent pay. Then we are speaking about health and safety at work. We are speaking including mental health, work-life balance, opportunities for professional development, and a workplace culture of respect and inclusion. So we firmly believe that promoting quality jobs is really not a luxury, it's an economic and social necessity. And once again, social dialogue and collective bargaining must be in the heart of all this. I think this is one of the core principles of our social model, and it has to be reinsured and stressed also in the new action plan. One of the last points I wanted to mention, and this was mentioned by Executive Vice President Menzato, this is the question of skills, investment in skills and lifelong learning. We think that no worker should be abandoned in the European Union, so we have also this concept for a skills guarantee for workers, so really to make sure that there is a right to further education, training and requalification. So this must be made accessible for everybody throughout their lives. And we must also adapt our labor market policies to meet the challenges of the 21st century. We are talking about just transition. I think skills and the right to qualification, reskilling, upskilling must be a cornerstone of this just transition. We have also issued an opinion where we demand a just transition framework, including a directive for the world of labor. We presented this to the European Commission and also to the European Council, and we hope that we will make some efforts in this respect. And last point, we must ensure that social protection systems are modern, inclusive and resilient and adapted to the needs of a more flexible labor market. And we see this when it comes to platform work, when it comes to remote work and all these points. And last but not least, it's a big issue, but the question of artificial intelligence. We think that also here we must make more efforts in the European Union. We were involved in the Artificial Intelligence Action Summit in Paris. We saw that there are different concepts from the US with a very disruptive approach, and we were blamed from some participants there that we have an old-fashioned only regulatory approach in Europe. I think we should find the right balance, not to over-regulate, to use this tool, because I think it should be used, not to replace workplaces, but to facilitate work and to make more work even more decent. But we are also convinced that we need to close some gaps, because also for artificial intelligence it is important that workers and social partners, all actors, are on board, and we think there are still some gaps also in legislation that should be closed. If we do this, then I think we are on the right way to further develop our concept of decent work, and we are very happy to share all our positions with you and to work with all of you to further develop this European Pillar of Social Rights, because it should serve not only as a compass for member states, but also definitely for candidate countries, and I know that this is already the case. So once again, I think a very good opportunity to discuss this here this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you for your first support for the civil society and social partners in the Western Balkans. I think you have a real friend here. And in my work at the committee, I have focused on Western Balkans, but I must say that such priority on top of the list of priorities for enlargement is for Oliver. And he is not only talking the talk, he is walking the walk, and he's been present and pushing for many of our activities, visiting the region and really providing support to our partners in the region. Now I would like to invite Pilvi Torsti. Pilvi Torsti is the director of the European Training Foundation. Ms. Torsti is a Finnish education expert and former MP. She has held senior government roles, co-founded educational initiatives, and with deep roots in civil society, she co-founded the United World College in Mostar and advocates for education as a driver of global change. Now, Ms. Torsti, can you please tell us more about ETF and your activities, which are huge, as I know, and how is ETF supporting lifelong learning and skills, adoption of skills to the new world? Ms. Torsti.
Thank you, Dragica. Dobro jutro, good morning to everyone. First, I think as we are in the second day, as Oliver mentioned, and for Minister Nisic-Schneider, it's the first day, but the distance from the audience, the words when you are in the audience, is as long as it feels here. So we are looking at ourselves on the screen and we hardly see you, but let us still try to make this more a dialogue than a speeches from the podium, because we are after all here as a social forum, and I think that's very important as a notion, forum coming together to talk. About ETF, I thought I'll actually structure my intervention into three. I tell a little bit what ETF actually stands for, then a couple of words also following the Commissioner Minzatu and Oliver of the role of Pillar of Social Rights and the EU context, and finally one or two examples of ETF's work. First, ETF is an EU institution, EU agency, if you like, that has worked for 30 years in the field of employment and education, bringing actually these two fields together. And luckily I had in my also professional life a pleasure to work on both fields, because as we often know, we need both. We need the understanding of the needs of the labor market, and we need the services actually of the education system and education providers to really bring about transformation and change in these important fields. ETF provides intelligence, so it monitors education and training employment systems outside the European Union countries, in particular in the neighborhood, so almost 30 years here in the Western Balkans, but also beyond. And then with that monitoring and intelligence data, also an analysis as to where are we going to foresight work, we do very practical political dialogue, political advice work with the governments. 2 weeks ago we discussed with Minister Nisic about the very concrete elements of the labor law that she just described. ETF is involved in discussion about the different chapters with the paths towards the European Union accession. So we are trying to translate the evidence, monitoring and foresight intelligence into very practical, forward-looking, transformative work with all the governments and countries present here today. I think there is a very long history with many of you, and I thank you for that cooperation. Our role, in other words, is to be the critical friend, representative of the European Union outside the Union in the field of human capital development. So that's in a nutshell about ETF. Then coming to the second role of EU and kind of what is also at the moment very topical here. So we are here in a panel about the pillar of social rights. Thank you, Oliver, for describing it, I think, very both eloquently and precisely, the meaning of it. European Union is, after all, it was established for peace. We saw yesterday actually many people recognizing the importance of peace and stability. And when we talk about employment and labor market and mobility, it's fundamentally about social rights. And hence the pillar of social rights and the related action plan is so important. And there in the pillar of social rights, of course, there is this right for lifelong learning, and that's the lifelong learning is at the core of the work of both of ETF when we work with the countries. However, I think it's even more recognizable that it's not only a right that we should talk about, but this year the European Union launched an initiative led by Commissioner Executive Vice President Minzatu called Union of Skills. And in that Union of Skills, the notion of skills and notion of lifelong learning is not only seen probably as a right, but also as a necessity for competitiveness, as a necessity for the future of single market, prosperous Europe. And I think that is to be noted here. So it's a just transition element, but it's also a competence element, competition element, and hence we can always bring the word competition and competencies sort of together through skills. So as a European policy, Union of Skills sort of follows from the pillar of social rights. And when we've been looking through the lenses and the intelligence of ETF, we would like to really stress a couple of elements here. One is that if we look at the statistics, the evidence of the Western Balkans, currently we have about 5% of the workers participating adults in lifelong learning annually, 5%, where the EU average is around 13%. So that's a message to all of us. If lifelong learning is not only a right, but also a necessity for really competitive, well-functioning societies, this is something to push forward together. How we see the elements that could be brought together also based on examples of other countries. We work a lot on the governance systems. So ETF organizes, there is a network, some of you are part of it, and that gets together every year, a peer learning with the countries with which we work, to really look what governance models bring together the employment, education, social dialogue partners, civil society partners, in a meaningful way towards good lifelong learning systems. And then there is this notion of skills as investment. I really encourage all of us to see the Union of Skills as a European Union policy as an opportunity to really underline this notion of skills as an investment, and hence the benefit of all, and hence part of all discussions there is concerning also the pillar of social rights. So as a second cluster or point of mine, if you take something with you, take the idea of EU having the pillar of social rights as a very strong component for social Europe, and as part of that, lifelong learning being a right, and now a Union of Skills making it also really a necessity as part of the competitive systems. Then a couple of examples of the ETF's work in this region. I already mentioned the very regular dialogue we have with the governments, both typically with the ministers of education and employment, and that of course always brings about the notion of the social dialogue partners and civil society partners. And there we work towards legislative transformations and examples, and also paving a way towards in the EU paths. The role of the civil society organizations in the room, Minister mentioned, and it's even in the title, the social dialogue actually here in Montenegro, but more broadly, the social the dialogue partners and civil society organizations are of course fundamental when we are looking at the skills needs for the future job markets, and also for the sort of citizens' rights, citizens' ability to be part of democratic societies. And there we are organizing as ETF, as said, networks, peer learning events. Last month we got together in Tirana, organized together with European Economic and Social Committee and our agency called Eurofound. And this type of activities, of course, need to continue, because by getting together we also then learn different models. Then there is a policy called Youth Guarantee that we've been working for years now with in the Western Balkans. And why I mention it here? Youth Guarantee, first of all, is a good example of a European Union policy that was first established in a couple of the member states as a response to high youth unemployment that resulted from the financial crisis in 2009. That's when the Youth Guarantee was first conceived, as a policy to look at that, who are the young people who are out of education and out of employment, the so-called needs. And then in different countries, education systems and the employment services were tailored to answer to the needs of those young people. Then it became a European Union level policy, and now in the last years this European Union policy has traveled to the Western Balkans, so it serves as a good example, I think, of something we discussed yesterday as gradual integration. So European Union policy taken forward in a context of these countries that are in different ways looking towards the also full membership in the future. And in the Youth Guarantee context, the civil society organizations and social dialogue partners are actually very important, because in any country where the Youth Guarantee really has worked, the model has worked because it's been evidence-based and done with stakeholders. And the stakeholders are exactly these organizations. What does it mean? It means that when you look at, for instance, a municipality, you can map the different stakeholders there and see that who could be actually the job offer, who would actually offer jobs, who could actually offer services for young people in order to move towards the job market, or in some cases move towards education. And as we speak here, to make this example very concrete, here in Montenegro, one of our colleagues, not in this room, but actually doing a practical work, I believe even this week, is working in 3 municipalities to do an outreach exercise to actually map who are the stakeholders in those particular municipalities vis-à-vis Youth Guarantee, so meaning paving a way for young people towards both education and jobs. Because unfortunately, as Minister very well knows, the statistics are not on our side at the moment. The unemployment has been rather increasing than decreasing, and in particular among the young people and among women, we see the problematic figures. So all these policies are, of course, very timely and needed to serve the population. So, Dragica, this would be my first intervention, a couple of words about what is it actually ETF as an EU agency working to help and support, being a critical friend and a partner outside the European Union. European Union having, of course, the social pillar of social rights and the Union of Skills as a key policy, and then examples of youth guarantee and work with the civil society organization and social dialogue partners through peer learning events and through an active GLAD network that I invite you all to become partners unless you already are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pilvi. You have really clearly stated or gave us the overview of the activities of ETF and the EU as an EU agency here in the region, and I was struck with the data that you mentioned that here in the Western Balkans only 5% of people are in lifelong learning, and the EU average is, I think you said 35%, 13. So it's a huge disproportion, and having in mind also the already present in the region mismatch between the skills and labor market needs, and also the fast development of IT and AI. The workforce needs to change, skills need to change even faster, so a lot of work, so here the speed needs to be very fast in the region. And as, especially as you mentioned, for challenges for female and young people. So thank you again. Now our final speaker, I hope he will link online, is Željko Jovanović. Mr. Jovanović is the president of the Roma Foundation for Europe, former director of the Open Society Foundation. He also chairs the European Roma Institute and holds roles in major international organizations. Mr. Jovanović has long worked to empower Roma communities through advocacy, leadership, and grassroots initiatives. Mr. Jovanović, I see you there on the screen. Can you please tell us why should Roma be seen as a strategic asset in Western Balkan reforms, and what's needed for policymakers to recognize and invest in Roma potential? Mr. Jovanović, you have the microphone.
Ms. Martinovic, thank you very much. I'll speak in English, so many people in the audience can understand, although there is a translation, of course. But first of all, I want to apologize for not being there. It's much more comfortable to meet people in person. We are not anymore in COVID time, but other obligations prevented me to travel. I want to thank the organizers for placing the Roma topic in such a prominent panel next to Minister Nisic, Vice President of the European Commission Roxana Mozatu, Mr. Robke, Mr. Torsti. I'm very grateful for that. So I would just illustrate a little bit of a context before I move to the case for investment as we see the Roma community in Europe at large, but also in the Western Balkans. So first of all, we have to recognize that the biggest priority for the region, and most of the political leaders, if not all, agree that the biggest priority for the region is economic growth and improving living standards. And they also see that the biggest threat to this is the demography. But in reality, and the situation is a little bit more complex. There is something that we call paradox, because at the same time we have high unemployment and high labor shortage, and this situation creates a significant underperformance of the labor markets in the region. There are three main reasons that we see for in this context. First of all, there are too many people not looking for jobs, and there are too many jobs that pay low wages, and the informal sector is too large. And in informal sector, we know that most of the vulnerable people are trying to earn and survive. Just as a comparison, the share of the contribution to GDP from the informal sector is about 30%, while in the European Union is about 17%. So these reasons are already well known, I suppose, to most of the national employment agencies and experts. The second, of course, related to demography, is the shrinking work age population. Just as an illustration, Serbia will lose about 40% of its work age population in only 25 years, so only in one generation, and this will have a tremendous impact on the region as a whole, while other countries will also lose in the same time frame between 20 to 25% of work age population. The third contextual reason that we see as highly problematic for this agenda of growth is underperforming education system. Employers' surveys show that only that about a quarter of employers in the region consider that skills that current workforce or working age population provides are insufficient or inadequate for the jobs that are offered on the market. Besides that, digital transformation affects most negatively the low-wage earners, and in the context of Roma, but also in the context of women's rights, people with disabilities, prejudice affects the labor market performance as well. Now, in this context, in which we have the workforce paradox, in which, as I said, there is high unemployment and high labor shortage at the same time. Roma situation is even more difficult because of the prejudice. These effects have more adverse effects on our populations in the region. At the same time, as Ms. Torsti mentioned, we also see our population, especially our youth, as a case for investment. And I would say one of the solutions for the issue of competitiveness of the countries in the region, but also in the EU, because Roma are the youngest and fastest growing ethnic population on the continent and in the Balkans as well. We are younger even than the Albanian population, which is known to be very youthful. As an illustration, in Serbia, in only 10 years, between 14 to 29% of new labor entrants will be Roma. Our population is in some countries double in terms of the share of young people in population. World Bank estimated already 8 years ago that there was an investment in equality of Roma in the labor market. Serbia would gain in productivity more than 300 million euros annually. So with this in mind, the foundation has developed a kind of economic model in which we mapped the professions in deficit, the jobs in deficit, in the professions in deficit, where we lack workers in the Western Balkans per country. And we concluded that if the government would invest in the Roma population through vocational training for different professions, it would take between 3 to 6 months. There will be a return on investment in the period of 2 to 5 years, again, depending on the country and the profession. And we see that this is a serious boost to the Western Balkans growth, especially because we consider that there are opportunities already. First of all, funding is available for investment in the Roma population. There is growth plan, there is IPA, there are bilateral funding, also public budget funding. So funding is not a problem. Public support, which is kind of counterintuitive, is also there. We did a polling, and half of the citizens in the region believe that the support for Roma employment is weak and has been weak in all these years. Third, among the Roma, there is strongest support for the employment measures. When we ask the Roma population in the region, what are their priorities in their lives? Employment, income generation, improving income in various forms. The expression is always about employment and having regular earning is on the top of the list. Only 5% of Roma would consider emigrating from their country. So even the popular myth that Roma kind of seek a better life through emigration more than others is not really valid. We also built specialized partners, the Roma-led organizations, who can be social partners. They can be partners of the employers, they can be partners of the government in pursuing this agenda. So in our view, we consider that absolutely the agenda of the rights of the workers, rights of minorities is important for the region, but not only for the rights agenda and the compliance with the EU standards and conditions in the political criteria, human rights criteria, but also from the economic point of view, economic viability of the region and European and regional competitiveness. Because, as I said, we are talking about the youngest and fastest growing population that is entrepreneurial, that is very adaptive, that is multilingual, and has all the characteristics which are necessary for our economies to thrive. So I'll stop here and eventually answer any questions. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jovanovic, for giving us the insight into the situation of Roma population and the potential it has in the labor market and employment possibilities. Now, I would like to, if we can, see the results of the Slido first question. So, 0. So we have equal number of answers for, so the question was which part of European Pillar of Social Rights is the most important for the Western Balkans? So we have A, equal opportunities and access to the labor market, and B, fair working conditions. So equal importance to those two issues. And now I would also like to open the question for the second slide of question. So if you can please have a look at it and provide your answers. And now we have time for you. I'm opening the floor for your questions. So I have 1, 2. Okay, I have 1, 2. So the lady first and then the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisabeta Bojinoska from Hera, North Macedonia. Recent studies, a representative study in Macedonia, show that approximately 60% of the citizens consider gender equality as key important factor for EU integration. Women must be equally or nearly equally represented in the labor market as men if we truly want to have any kind of sustainable growth, including economic growth. The recent estimation, which were done by the researcher Jovanovic from the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, shows that on the macroeconomic impact on North Macedonia GDP, showed that if women employment rate were equal to those of men, the country GDP would increase by additional 2.5 billion euros, which means it's equivalent to 15% growth in GDP. To put this in perspective, 15% of GDP, the percentage that we achieved as a country in the last 8 years. This is how significant the benefits of gender equality are in the reality, or in closing the gender gap that we have in the labor market. For us, it's important through the Growth Action Plan and through the activities within the Reforma agenda to unlock the unused potential of the women who are inactive and are excluded from the labor market and the paid employment, mainly due to all the obligations which are related to all the activities for the care of the elderly people, marginalized people, or children. So we have clear data how to use this potential of the women if we invest in the social protection system and also if we invest in care economy. So my question is how to encourage or increase the commitment of the government within the both plan, the growth plan and the Reforma agenda, to invest in closing the gender gap in the labor market and to use untap the potential of the girls and women in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have this gentleman next, please.
Thank you. It seems like both of us
I
are
would
interested
appreciate if you could also introduce yourself.
Yeah. It's interesting that both of us are interested in probably the same topic, since our work of interest is the same. Viktor Mitevski, Executive Director of Association for Research and Analysis MAI from North Macedonia. I will continue speaking in Macedonian.
First of all, I would like to thank you that the youth guarantee was mentioned during your panel, because we are a country which is a non-EU member country, but it has been successfully implementing the youth guarantee for 8 years now. Having in mind that we have been working with a group of young people with data that haven't been published by the employment agency so far, one of the surprising things that we found out when working with them, that some of them were not even aware that they were part of the youth guarantee, which means that it should be more promoted as an instrument and to be brought to a level when they would be acceptable and accepted by the young people. Why am I saying this? It's because in 2023, by December of 2023, almost 38% of the unemployed young people were using the youth guarantee. This means that we have a huge percentage of young people who have who managed, after completing their formal education, to use some of the active measures available, maybe some kind of training or apprenticeship or some kind of additional activity related to their skills. What's interesting is that if we are talking about the gender perspective, is that in the lower age group, the male dominate, while in the higher group, it's the female who dominate. And if we look at the education profile of these people, is that the Macedonian young girls stay longer in education than boys, than young men, which means that the young women have higher education. Why is education important? It's important because the success of positive living of the youth guarantee increases with the level of education. The more educated you are, the greater the chances are to stay employed after using the youth guarantee. This is contradictory, on the other hand, with the governmental policies, as well as what I was able to see in the growth plan and in the national reform agendas of the countries from the Western Balkans, which in the area of education most commonly talk about vocational training, which is shorter, and it also provides narrow skills for the young people that are part of that system. On the other hand, if we look at the success or the money earned in the industries where the young people end up after leaving the youth guarantee, we see that only 20% out of those 90,000 people who used the youth guarantee 7 years ago have an average salary above the national average of salaries. So basic and most of the young people end up in the labor-intensive industries that require great labor and have lower salaries. My question is how to deal as countries that most frequently depend on the European companies, that is the export to the EU. If we look at the data, you will see that we depend on the single European market. When I might be too harsh if I say when we've been imposed or we've been forced to develop generations with narrow skills, instead of having our economy and our growth founded on knowledge, we, by having this approach, would develop based on skills, which is contrary to the development of most of the European economies and EU member countries. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Now I come back to our panelists to give their answers or views on these comments and questions. So they're basically on gender gap and youth guarantee and everything linked to that. So I would go in the same order. If you would like to comment and answer, Naida, please.
First of all, allow me to thank you for taking part in this discussion. What I need to make reference to, and I haven't mentioned it in the first part, is that Montenegro, starting from January 1st, within its capacities, implements the youth guarantee, and we are really grateful for all the support we have received regarding that program. I will agree with you that youth guarantee must be better promoted in the near future. As for Montenegro, the youth guarantee this year and next year is designed as a pilot project in 3 municipalities, Bijelopolje, Nikšić and Ulcinj in the south, and we hope that in these 2 years we'll be able to raise awareness among young people what youth guarantee is, what benefits they can enjoy, because the way it is designed, that it is intended for young people aged 15 to 29 who can get requalified, who can get additional qualification, shows that it's a well-designed project which at one point will have to be adapted to the vocational training that is more narrow. What Montenegrin government has done this year is to have simultaneous application and implementation of vocational training, professional training, and youth guarantee, so that with the support of all partners we can sufficiently promote the youth guarantee. And I'm sure once the pilot project is over, the entire state, our citizens will be ready to get involved in the youth guarantee. There is still this big gap, on the other hand, between men and women when it comes to the labor market. And the topic of a labor market is rather complex in Montenegro, because in Montenegro we can divide the labor market only in 3 regions, only northern region, central region, and southern region. And already in the southern region, let me call it this way, we have negative employment, a big deficit of workforce. In the central region, this deficit is around 4%, while we have extremely high unemployment, around 50% in the north of our country. The unemployment structure shows that more than 20+% of people has spent more than 1 year as unemployed person at the employment agency, which classifies them as hard to employ persons. So there is always also a big difference between men and women when it comes to unemployment. And our plan is, and you mentioned it yourself, is to use active labor measures, but also to promote the role of women, to strengthen them, empower them, and to be more represented in the labor market. I hope that alignment of our legislation, and especially with the 2 most recent directives, so with the labor law regarding the equal pay for men and women, I hope that that will help to pay equally men and women. I agree the situation is similar to what you said. In Montenegro we have more women who stay longer in education. Women have maybe better and higher qualification than men. All those are current issues that we in Montenegro are trying to address. And with the support of our social partners, we are trying to tackle all those challenges. I need to add that Montenegro has around 10.59% of unemployed persons, so unemployment rate is 10.59. And I'm sure usually very soon we will have the historic low level of unemployment. Also, we need to address the NEET category of unemployed persons, so young persons who have not been in the labor market for quite a long. Those are categories within our employment agency who require a different approach to addressing their unemployment than the typical approach where we have only unemployment advisor and unemployment person. That's why I mentioned the law that allows the full digitalization of the employment agency. At this point in time, we have the possibility of mediation between employers and unemployed persons through direct contact at the employment agency, but also through applications, different applications, because we are aware that young people will rather use digital models than old-fashioned typical models and go physical to the employment agency. In my address on several occasions, I have made an appeal to employers, because we have observed that at some periods there is greater employment than the jobs announced. So in Montenegro, you have this situation that employers frequently strike deals with unemployed persons and thus avoid the employment agency. We have also observed that statistically this has changed, and we have managed to address this. So labor market is a complex category, complex topic, and it is one of the pillars of social rights for reason, and we have invested a lot of effort in this regard. I haven't addressed social inclusion in my speech so far because since we have had government reshuffle, we divided the ministry into the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Family, Social Welfare and Demographics, but the two ministries are very much interdependent. At the Ministry of Labor, regarding social inclusion, we are now drafting the law that I need to mention, which is the law on a permanent seasonal worker. And as one of the motivation, we offer the option that family allowance beneficiaries should be empowered and included in the labor market by not losing their family allowance during the first period of their employment. We see this as the measure to encourage beneficiaries of the family allowance as more vulnerable members of the population to activate themselves in the labor market. I'm sure that the Youth Guarantee will help in this regard, its promotion, lifelong learning, and our overall cooperation with the Ministry of Education and Innovation is very detailed. We are members of different groups, and together with the social partners, I hope that we will be able to design some new active employment measures and that we will offer innovative approach so that all citizens who go through the training or retraining or measures will be enabled to apply and use in the labor market. I hope I have managed to cover many challenges regarding the labor market, and I believe that Montenegro can do a lot when it comes to its labor market. We are a country with addressing and facing deficit when it comes to its workforce. We have many foreign workforce, so we support this. So we are also now part to EU, which means open labor market through negotiation chapter 2, and our citizens see the open labor market as one of the benefits of EU membership. Movement through entire Europe, free movement through entire Europe, for the purpose of training, for the purpose of finding a job. So we work on a daily basis to adapt our labor market to the EU labor market. And we had this reform to increase the minimum wage for secondary school graduates to 600 euro, to university students to 800 euro. Also, one of the directives we want to employ is the equal minimum wage directive. All those are benefits that we have put in practice so that Montenegro and its labor markets can be prepared for accession to EU. And just one more quick remark. As for gender equality, what we have found through labor market analysis is that among younger categories, the gender gap is not so much present or obvious as it is among our older population, especially in the north, because we have higher unemployment among women in the north, women older than 40 and women who have spent more than a year as unemployed at the employment agency, and that's the category that the Ministry and the Employment Agency will intensively address in the near future. Thank you. Thank you, Naida.
But briefly, please.
Yes, I think I can be very brief because I think the minister covered really a lot of points. Very impressive. Just one word to the Slido survey. I think it confirms our approach that we should focus really on quality employment and on the right skills for people. And I think especially for young people, I can agree what you have said. I think it's not a secret that a good environment for young people, good working conditions is really key to avoid the brain drain that takes already place in many regions and that took place also in other enlargement countries. I wanted to say that in the Economic and Social Committee we are applying the so-called youth test. So on key opinions that we draft, we involve in a structured way youth organizations taking part in our work, in our deliberations. Of course, they cannot vote, but they have all the other rights. I think this is one contribution to bring in the perspective of young people also in the institutional work of the EU. And the second point on the gender gap, not only gender pay gap, I of course agree with your points and with your assessment. I think beyond the gender pay gap, we have also to look in all the other policy areas stronger than we did it in the past. And one point, actual topic is the AI. AI is not value neutral and AI is not gender neutral. So I think this is a good example that it's not only about pay, first of all about pay, but not only. And we have to close here the gender gaps in all policy areas. And I think there's one opportunity that we should not miss. We have since 17 years a pending directive at European level, the horizontal anti-discrimination directive, and it's now on the list of possible withdrawal directives of the European Commission. I think the decision will be made in the next month, and I think it wouldn't be a good signal, because this anti-discrimination directive would cover not pay, or not only the world of labor, but also social protection, education, the access to goods and services, and I think this would be, I would say, more important than ever that we move forward with this. But let's see, I hope very much that we will make some progress, because this is one of the biggest barriers. It's not only a question of equality, it's also a question of using the whole potential of the society and of the economy in the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Oliver Pilvi.
Thank you very much. Three points related also to the questions. In the beginning, I described how the work of ETF is data collection and then translating that into meaningful policy advice and bringing the evidence to the decision makers together with the different groups of society, so that there really is a truly sort of, if not forced, but enforced and supported dialogue and listening. And in that spirit, so my first point would be the mismatch, and this also I think relates to gender and the equal opportunities that we saw in the Slido. One data collection that we did in last years was European Skills and Jobs Survey, also in the Western Balkan countries. That's normally has been previously done only in the member states. So again, as one so that everyone is calm, but 5 Western Balkan countries were part. And when we look, and it was from those figures that I shared, the lifelong learning. Let me share another figure from those. I was checking while I was listening. So when we look at the new technologies sort of brought to workplace, so the figure in Western Balkans was 21%, while in the EU average is 43%. Or learning to use new software, Western Balkan 12, EU average 35. So this data is of course something that we can't hide away from when we then move to look at the potential policies. And here I move to the second point, which is the youth guarantee, which is of course seen as an EU policy. If you look at broadly where it's been implemented, typically you have better results than without. Obviously then you have such gaps that were mentioned, for instance, in the North Macedonian case, and I would take a positive stance. You have the figure, okay, certain percentages didn't find services, so let's make them better, because we actually now know, so we have evidence that is thanks to the following the particular group of young people. Overall, I think we can say that typically youth guarantee helps to bring the evidence that who are really the young people who we are trying to target. And then it helps to bring everyone to the same table to start developing really good services, career guidance, tailored services, as was mentioned by the minister and also myself earlier. So looking now in this country, 3 municipalities, 3 different regions, and particularly mapping there, not only governmental partners, not only schools, not only employment services, but really the social dialogue partners and the civil society partners, so that everyone is in the same table, all the stakeholders are there, and everyone is there for the benefit of young people and their fundamental right for the lifelong learning. So that perhaps on the youth guarantee broadly. And then thirdly, I would like to close by saying that whether we look at the sort of from the perspective of the institution I come from, so that our evidence gathering, or the policies such as youth guarantee, European policies translated into the context of different countries. When we say the fundamental importance about having the strong social dialogue and participation of civil society organization, sometimes I hear at podiums people say, oh, there is a talk the talk and then there is a walk the walk. But we cannot know, for instance, what works for the youth unless the youth organizations are in the table. We cannot know what is the decisive factor from the workers' perspective unless the workers are in the table, as we heard yesterday. So whatever policy is being drafted by the ministries, we know from countries typically that the sustainable employment, skills, lifelong learning policies and systems are created through working and bringing all the voices to a table. And that we see a little bit as our role. Just to, as a last example, I think it was last fall, somewhere September, October, we needed, for instance, in Serbia, an event, a CTF, where you had the think tanks, you had the sort of our evidence, you had the ministries, and you had the organization, social dialogue partners, again, brought together. So that the government, when you meet only with the government, you are, of course, missing then the sort of grassroots voice, but vice versa. If you only meet with the grassroots voice, then the translation and the direct exposure is also missing, and hence the events like this, and luckily already in 10th edition, are so important. So I hope to have illustrated that you need the evidence, then you need the practical implementation, the evidence from that, and then the policymakers, decision makers, governments in the same table with the EU data and with the civil society and social dialogue partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is Željko Jovanović still with us? Does he want to comment? No? Okay, we can now slowly close because we are already, of course, over time, but I would like to see the results of the second slide or question, if you can possibly. It's very predominant, the answer to why there is a shortage of skills in the Western Balkans. The answer with most votes is migration to the EU of skilled workforce, and then I see the second also under B, absence of competent and functional education systems for reskilling. All the other answers are not far behind. With that, I would like to thank our panelists for giving us an excellent overview. Yes, please.
I think it's a very interesting comment actually in the Slido that if we calculate, I don't know if everyone could see it, but if you calculate the answers, you actually had, well, only 16 voted, so I think we need to wake up, so the survey result would not be that validated by survey experts, but if you take the 10 who were awake, no, sorry, it's 14, I believe, who answered, actually 8 have picked something that relates to the national systems, and 6 the kind of interest to go for the EU job markets. So it seems to suggest that the message is very much actually for the local stakeholders when it comes to curricula education systems, and both in the formal education systems as well as informal ones. I think that's the reading of that Slido actually.
You obviously have a lot of experience in reading evidence data. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to you. And let's have a 10, 15 minutes coffee break, and we meet back here with the second panel. Thank you.
Dobar dan svima. Dobro došli natrag. Nadam se da će nam se...
Welcome back. I hope other colleagues will join us back. It's nice to sit on the terrace, but let's also try to finish this last panel. It's not easy to moderate these last panels when we are running out of time and when colleagues are flying today, and we still need to leave some space to discuss joint declaration, so we will slightly change our plan and shorten this session of ours. So this panel is also about the implementation of the European Pillar for Social Rights in the Western Balkans and consideration of the role of social partners and organizations of civil society organizations. But while the first panel focused on securing more jobs and developing skills, in this panel we'll focus on social protection, equality and inclusion. So the next three big categories of the European Pillar of Social Rights.
From the chairperson of our committee, we heard what are the goals within the action plan. I would just mention one of those, and that is that the number of persons exposed to the risk of poverty to be reduced for 15 million. Unfortunately, both poverty and inequalities, but also the number of persons at risk from poverty. This is a topic we're going to be discussing today. It's really topical. And of course, European Pillar of Social Rights is important for the Western Balkan countries as well. That is why these countries are involved in many activities, in meetings, platforms, etc. Before I ask the question and present our panelists, I would open the slide with a question. So I'm asking you once again to... Actually, there are 4 options. The question is, what outcome would be the most beneficial for the Western Balkan region? So if you can get involved and give your opinion on the issue, we're going to look for results later on. And now I will present our panelists and to ask them questions, of course. The idea was to have 2 rounds of discussions, but because of the time that we don't have, actually, I will ask just one specific question to each and every one of them, and then one for all of the panelists. So please answer to these 2 questions. Bearing in mind that we do not have much time. We're going to start with Tanya Ivanov, president of organization Reactor, feminist think tank from Skopje, and coordinator of the Coalition for Gender Equality in the process of EU accession. Tanya, you have experience of more than 25 years in research related to the gender issues, and you're active member of several groups for gender equality, so you really have a good overview. So please present your coalition, but also to say something about the issue of gender equality in the Western Balkans, and what are maybe some recommendations how to reduce the gender gap, how to improve the situation. And the second question, how social partners and organizations of civil society, how much this social dialogue is developed in this specific area, and how much the authorities are actually respecting the CSOs. So you have like 5 minutes, okay. Please. Thank you. I wanted to speak in Macedonian, and I will be doing that because people have their headsets, and usually I'm speaking in English. So, but I will try to use my language.
Hello, everybody. As Marina mentioned, I come from the REACTOR, the Research in Action, which coordinates the Coalition for Gender Equality. I will start with 3 main words that are most relevant for us and why REACTOR was established during the COVID lockdown, and that's networking, solidarity, and coordinated action and synergy. The key principles that were mentioned by Mr. Robke in the morning session about equality, justice, and fair play are the principles and mission that we follow, and for that reason we decided to get united in the region thanks to our long-term cooperation with other organizations in the region as partners, and to transform our societies and to get involved those who've been excluded. Unfortunately, inclusion is the last topic on this agenda as well, and the audience is not that big, but what we do is whenever we are not invited, we get invited, and we try to answer the questions up front. We organize premeditative actions that analyze society. The fact that we are research-oriented helps us to react timely, and that's how EquaPro was established, thanks to a coalition coordinated by a Swedish organization, and thanks to 2 national experiences, EU Dialogue that we did with the Open Society Foundation and another organization, and another structural mechanism that happened for the first time in our country, IPA to CSO, then when we tried to introduce civil society organizations in the dialogues where they were included. All this experience helped us get to EquaPro, the Kosovo Women Network, also the Bosnian organization, and the Women's Center from Montenegro, and another network from Albania, and few other partners got involved. But as part of the EquaPro coalition, what we do, we try to think locally and to react locally and to act regionally. That's our main syntagma, and we got 30 other organizations involved with the support by EU funds and the civil society mechanism. And what we tried to do during the COVID was to be prepared at the time when our governments were closed due to the lockdown. We GAP3, the EU gender equality mechanism applied that followed GAP2, so that GAP3 would be incorporated as a structural mechanism in the IPA, which was a novelty, and we managed to involve gender equality not as a token but as a horizontal approach in the programming. And we are happy about this, but we are not happy with the implementation. That's why we have a lot of work to do. We do sectoral analysis of all sectors that are part of the EU negotiations. For example, we have analysis how AI and digitalization affect women's rights and human rights in general. Property analysis, where we see significant discrepancies according to gender. We also did analysis about the care economy, political participation, statistics, business sector, tourism, all the elements necessary to the Western Balkans to see where we stand with the gender equality. The situation is not as good as we would like to, but we try in dialogue with the governments and Brussels to discuss and to analyze and inform decisions taken by Brussels and by our government. Our idea is to provide evidence so that the policies would be equal for all. I know that we don't have much time, but what's important is that we have introduced a lot of energy in coordination, and we try not to overlap with the other organizations. We lack transparency of all the actions, both in regard to gender programming and also the work of the young people and civil society, and that's why we try to act in the spirit of togetherness in the community and to act on both policy level and at a local level through grassroots initiative with the support of the local partners. Last year with Equapor, we managed to have a serious number of organizations working in the field of diversity and equality in the region, and to organize the first working group on gender and diversity within the framework of the Berlin process, which that followed after long advocacy by Equapro. And I think that in that way we are managing to achieve what we would like to have, and that's to apply all these issues horizontally instead of talking about inclusivity without having real inclusivity in all sessions. We try to change that, and through inputs to the reports, to the country reports, acceding to EU, the progress reports, now country reports, we provide input not only about gender equality, but about all the chapters that are important for promoting fundamental rights, human rights, especially the rights of women and marginalized groups. And intersectoral access is important. We give information about Chapter 19, mentioned this morning, and regional markets competitiveness. My colleagues try to ensure visibility in the region. Half of the women in the region are not on the labor market, and we are trying to change this through inclusive policies, but not looking at the gender equality as a follow-up, but upfront by including that aspect through working groups and changing all this during the planning phase. Finally, I just want to mention that what's important, yesterday, I believe one of my colleagues said mentioned the energy sector, how important is that regardless of the infrastructural investments, they forget about working with people, because people, especially the most vulnerable one, will be affected if these infrastructural reforms do not follow hand in hand with the reforms improving the lives of our people. I don't think I have any more time. I will stop here.
Da ste zaista napomenuli ono što je.
Thank you. You said what is very important, and this is togetherness and regional approach. Together we are stronger. This is well known, of course. And of course, the sectoral analysis you are producing for informed decision making, I would ask you in this respect, how much public sector and decision makers, how much they really use your analysis when making decisions. Implementation is a different story. We don't have time for that, but at least in the area of social partners and CSOs, maybe a sentence or two.
What's interesting during this period while we were working on the analysis, the governments incorporated our analysis because they were necessary, because the system required the gender element, and we were lucky enough to be involved, to be included, and take our analysis to be taken into consideration. The roadmaps for gender equality they were also incorporated. Unfortunately, we did a gender analysis on the growth plan, which is not gender mainstream, but what we managed to do through the reform agenda and with our analysis to include a component that will provide more inclusive involvement of all stakeholders in the country through the reforms that include reforms in education and all the other sectors that are very important. So I would say that when they need us, they involve us, but frequently the most problematic thing is a lack of feedback, because we do not know what has been included of everything we have said. For example, the law on working relations, which is constantly being amended, but we still don't have a law that takes into consideration the aspects provided by the civil society organization, and that means being harmonized with the EU acquis, including to have access for everybody.
So after the issue of gender equality, we are moving to another group which is also excluded and marginalized, and these are the young people. We have Marina Vujicic, Executive Director of the Association of Young People with Disabilities of Montenegro. We spoke a while ago, and we concluded that she is the one eliminating barriers. So Marina, you have a rich experience not just in civil society, but also you State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you are involved in many networks and platforms at the European level. Just for example, European Forum for Persons with Disabilities. As I said, both young and persons with disabilities are some of the most marginalized, vulnerable groups here in the Western Balkans. So with your experience working in the civil sector with youth organizations, what are your recommendations? What should be done in order to change the state of play so that these two groups could be included better into the society and different processes? Thank you, Lydia. Greetings, everybody. Greetings from Montenegro. This is a nice country. One of the most beautiful, I would say, for me, the most beautiful in the world. You who came here as guests, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for staying at this last panel, because this is the topic which, I have to say, that is often the last. But I'm saying this is because that is in reality. I'm grateful to be one of the panelists today, and I want to thank to the European Economic and Social Committee for enabling me to do so. I would like to have somebody younger speaking on my behalf. I am 8 years of age, so I'm not young anymore. So I would like to have somebody younger who can replace me and take over from what I have been doing so far. This is also part of the answer to your question, Lydia. That is why I'm saying this. The issue of rights of young people and persons with disabilities, or even young people with disabilities, or even women with disabilities, persons with disabilities who belong to LGBTQ population, or Roma or Egyptian groups, is very complex. Some of these groups are totally marginalized groups, totally invisible, as if they do not exist. The system does not recognize them adequately, and nobody is working with them. If I would have to single out the key recommendation, the most important thing to be done, I'm always saying, this is what I'm saying for the last 15 years since I'm active in this area, this is awareness raising and changing the mindset. I'm claiming, and I'm sure that everything is starting from the mindset, from the awareness, the way we perceive persons around us, and in this respect, young people or persons with disabilities. It gives me creeps, and I'm very angry when I hear that, you know, the youth are our future. No, the young people are the present. They have to take their roles and responsibilities right now. They have to have opportunities right now, and young people are living right now, and they should have their say. They are not there just for pro form, enabling others to make decisions. Young people should be those creating the reality, creating policies. Unfortunately, that is not reality, and this is because of the decision makers, those who are adopting youth policies. Imagine if young people with disabilities who is discriminated by decision makers, by perceived by decision makers as less valuable as a human. So I like very much, Lydia, that you mentioned a context which I like very much. One slogan you said, informed decision making. That is what I'm looking for from Montenegrin governments for 15 years now, but our governments are behaving as if they are never making informed based decisions. The government is never asking those whose policies are affecting them. So they're adopting different policies, decisions, they are planning measures and activities, I mean the authorities, and for us in Montenegro it's characteristic because we are a small country. We take over a lot of things from abroad. We are neglecting the national context. So we should be dealing more with ourselves. We should have more analysis of ourselves. What is characteristic for us, why, for example, young people are demotivated to be socially active. Even if they are going to the politics because this is profitable, because you don't have to prove yourself. You simply participate in the elections. You don't have to have a background or a good CV. They are just like a decor alongside the decision makers, member of the certain political group. This country, unfortunately, is prone to political affiliation when it comes to the labor market, employing persons because of their political affiliations, which is bad, of course. And in the context of the European Pillar of Social Rights, these two chapters cannot be neglected when we are talking about the third one. We can hardly be talking about social protection or inclusion or any kind of equality without equal opportunities, without fair working conditions, and we don't have that in Montenegro. We don't have equal opportunities. I was commenting yesterday when it comes to the accessible mobility. We are here in Budva, which is metropolis of our tourism, which is totally inaccessible as a town. We don't have accessible transport for persons with disabilities. This is a town where beaches are inaccessible to persons with disabilities. This is just one segment. And Montenegro as a whole is very much inaccessible because for decades the decision makers didn't see persons with disabilities. We were invisible. They thought that we shouldn't be included, part of the society, but actually that we are a vulnerable group that should be taken care of, but they are basically neglecting us in decision-making processes.
Often when we criticize the government, we do it to make it better and to stop making mistakes. When I criticize Montenegrin government, I do it by trying to preserve this government from its own mistakes that current generations and future generations will suffer from and suffer the consequences of those wrong decisions. Our legislation is also not good Tanya spoke partially about implementation. That should be better. I often say when it comes to the rights of persons with disabilities, the Montenegrin legislation is not adequate either. It is not aligned with the international standards, and I'm referring to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities ratified by the European Union as a regional organization. So European legislation has to be aligned with the UN Convention, so Montenegrin legislation also needs to be aligned with the UN Convention. The same goes for the inclusion in general. Montenegro reduced inclusion to something that is integration and segregation. Persons with disabilities are grouped. You don't see them in the public. We are not represented. Marina Vojacic has been present in the public for 15 years, but most people in Montenegro cannot remember even 4 or 5 people with disabilities, other persons with disabilities. Society is so small. If Marina left Montenegro tomorrow, if Marina took an international job, then persons with disabilities in Montenegro would be discussed every 3rd or 4th month. And I would stop here, and I'll just briefly say something about participation in decision-making, how much the government includes us. That's not the case. We don't even have public consultation processes. When I say that we don't have public consultations, we are involved in decision-making only at the formal level, in working groups formed by the ministries, but essentially we are not involved, we are not consulted in early stages, we are not consulted outside those working groups. Roundtables are not organized with us. Meetings with representative organizations of persons with disabilities are not organized. And this is not good neither for this government nor for anyone else in Montenegro. And I would like to urge everyone for this practice to change as soon as possible. Change already today, because we live today what our previous decisions are about. Thank you. I believe that in several minutes of your intervention you have covered and addressed some major issues and provided recommendations, of course, about changing the mindset, but also to raise awareness, especially among decision makers, what needs to be done and how it should be done. So more work needs to be done both with social partners and civil society, and this can be for the benefit of everyone. And I would like to use this opportunity to also include youth test to assess the policies and their benefits for young people in the EU. We started carrying out this policy, that this could be a good path to take. Now we can give the floor to Darko Pandurovic, who is the manager of the advocacy program at the Sarajevo Open Center, which is the civil society organization committed to the promotion of human rights with the focus on gender equality and LGBTQ, ITQ rights and community. We don't have time to list everything you do in your organization. You do many things. So that's another community that is continuously facing discrimination, persistent discrimination in the Western Balkans. So what are the major barriers this community faces? That's the question for you. And how much has the government involved you in decision making, and what are your key recommendations? Unfortunately, you have 5 minutes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying for this last panel, and thank you to the European Economic and Social Committee for giving us the space to talk and to connect with you. I'll try to be brief. I'll start with an illustrative example that includes many things we have discussed, and what I will discuss with it. It was in 2009, and the government in Bosnia and Herzegovina worked at that point, worked hard to meet some requirements from the European Commission. Those conditions were set for the reason of visa liberalization for citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, so that we could finally travel all over Montenegro without having to apply for visa. This is one of the examples that is often mentioned for those who are oversee or know the EU integration process as a good example. And so on the one hand, there was a clear award for decision makers, something they could use and show as the benefits for their voters. On the other hand, the tasks that were set, the conditions that were set were achievable, specific, very accurate. So something that was lost in this conditional policies, this specificity character. And one of the conditions was to adopt the comprehensive law on anti-discrimination, the first document of that type following the examples and practice in the European Union. This law prohibited the discrimination, introduced the protection mechanisms, protection on all grounds, sexual orientation, gender identity. And I'm sure decision makers at that point did not know what they voted for, but it was quickly adopted. The whole procedure was very efficient. The parliament approved it. The fact is that no one really read the laws in detail. They were just the way to reap some benefits, and this eventually happened. So what we have now is a very good law, but the reflection of this conditional policies that many of those documents, many of those policies were adopted without clear intention that they are implemented in practice. And that's what we have today. For some laws, it is 10 years, for some other laws, 12 years. The experience has showed that they are far from being implemented, but they are still valuable documents. And this conditional policy, despite all its deficiencies, conditional policy coming from the EU, eventually brings more benefits than problems and issues. All these are matters and policies that the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina would never address if it weren't for this condition. So let me now go back to the specific topic. People say that statistics often leave people on the margins, but I need to present some data that illustrated the baseline to understand the topic. When we talk about the position of LGBT persons in the labor market, these are the data from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but all the data I read when it comes to Western Balkans, so they're all similar, so there are no major discrepancies. As for the discrimination in the labor market, almost every second person, LGBTI person in Bosnia and Herzegovina is unemployed. Many of them work in informal economy. What's also a fact that half of them said is that during their work they were exposed to unacceptable comments regarding their identity, and many of them, absolute majority of them, hide their identity, fearing loss of job, fearing violence at work. The second barrier, something that happens in practice, is lack of visibility and opportunities. In active labor market measures, in trade unions, in professional organizations, LGBTI persons are almost invisible. And what's also very important, jobs for this group are limited to so-called safe hubs, safe balloons, civil sector, freelance, IT industry, and informal occupations. What we observed in some of our cases, especially through the situation in the field, is this persistent issue of discrimination and violence, and this leads to long-term economic consequences, impossibility to live independent life, homelessness, poverty. So there is this wrong perception in the business community. When the law on anti-discrimination was adopted, it also prohibited and governed and said that business owners, employers, when participating in the market, shall not discriminate and cannot offer their jobs based on discrimination. It's something that our business owners and employees still do not understand, and this is confirmed by many judicial cases that are pending and that we have initiated before Bosnian courts. One of the rooms for improvement is related to this obvious gap between civil society organizations on the one hand and social partners on the other hand. My honest impression is that there is more room for mutual cooperation, not something that would be forced or done under pressure. I think that that space is neglected, the space of cooperation. But this cooperation can actually bring a lot of benefit, both from trade unions, employers association, but also for civil society organizations. And that's exactly one of the recommendations I would like to offer here, and something I could identify by participating in the events of the European Economic and Social Committee as one of the biggest benefits. So we meet each other, we spend time each other, we talk to representatives of trade unions and employers, and we've been doing this for a year and a half within this process of coming together. So forums like this one I see as a specific benefit. My second recommendation, although it might not seem related to the economic and financial sector, it's related to the protection of civil society area. Currently, it's under direct attack by populist, anti-democratic, clerical, religious currents that are getting more stronger and more powerful, and they actually in power in many countries of the Western Balkans. The reason why they attack civil society is very simple. Especially, the reason why they attack civil society is that it's one of the rare voices that it does not depend on decision makers and people in power. It's part of the society that is still independent and keeps talking about things they don't want to hear. I will finish by saying something about a topic that might seem remote. Some people might be prejudiced towards LGBTI population, but what they have, those people who are now attacking this group are the people who have a criminal past. Those are the same people who are now planning to adopt the law on foreign agents. They do not follow the court decisions and comply with the court decisions. So they are more than willing to narrow the space of free expression and association. So this is more of a message for our friends from the Western Balkans. This community might seem remote, the matters might seem remote. What I want to understand is that one of the indicators of a free democratic society and rule of law is the way this community is treated in each society. Thank you, Darko. The situation is definitely not good. There is still plenty of room for improvement. What you said about cooperation between trade unions and civil society organizations. That's our experience from Croatia. We were the most recent country to join EU through JCC. Through JCC committees, we started understanding each other better, started working on joint projects. So it is one of advantage. And another thing, what you said, I agree that good laws do not mean also good implementation. And as Marina said, we need to change the mindset. And that's also relevant to what you talked about. What I would do now, since we won't have time for the second round of questions, I would like to check the results of the slide or question, and then
Rezultate prvog, ako je moguće.
Can we see the results, please? Okay, so now we see the results. The crucial reforms, rule of law, work standards, social dialogue, equal opportunities, political will, it's something we haven't mentioned, but definitely everything arises from it, democratic institutions, independent judiciary, shared values, and fight against corruption. But rule of law dominates as an answer, as the most important answer. So thank you. And I hope we now have enough time for our two last collocutors. We have a representative of the public sector with us, and I'm glad I can present Mr. Srđan Simović, Chief Labor Inspector at the Ministry of Labor and Social Dialogue. I was told you had a key role in implementing the reform in the sector of informal work, but you are very active in the region. You have contributed to regional efforts. Again, we come to the point where regional cooperation is very important to formalize the rights of workers through your involvement in the Western Balkan networks combating informal work. And we have heard these 2 days that informal work, grey economy, still constitute a major part of the economies in the Western Balkans. So question is, how could this problem be addressed properly, and what does your network in the Western Balkans does to do something about the informal work?
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. Regarding the fight against non-registered work within the labor inspection, we're trying to do our best. This is a challenge which is lasting for years and will endure, of course. What helped us a great deal in this respect in the last couple of years is the government of Montenegro. Because it enables employers certain benefits in order to register workers, employees, to sign a labor contract. So the social contributions have been reduced for the employers, and this was an impetus and very positive effect. So in just 1 year of this program, 40,000 employees have been registered as official employees. Then we started with implementation of the new program, Europe Now 2, which made another step in this respect. So the labor inspection has now an easy work to do. So rarely we see when we go on the field that Montenegrin citizens have been engaged without a labor contract, but we have a problem when foreigners are engaged. We often see that they are working without labor contracts, especially in the construction industry, hospitality, and very often they don't have any kind of documents, residence permits, for example. In this respect, we are cooperating closely with the police. At the start of 23, what you said, we have analyzed methodology of the labor inspection. I simply saw that these controls were focused on the city center, on the core of the city center in Podgorica. We haven't been covering the entire field. So with the detailed analysis, we saw that a lot of employers are operating in rural areas, and we saw that there were a lot of storage facilities, production facilities, etc., and a lot of workers. So we surprised them with our controls. So we worked intensively in the last 2 years, and I think we achieved very good results. At the same time, we increased our activities not just in countering non-registered work, but also activities in terms of compliance with other workers' rights, for example, the working hours. So with repressive measures, with fines, we managed to make the big supermarket chains to respect the working hours of their employees. That was the biggest achievement for us. We were very efficient. I'd like to praise with the fines, of course, they are not our priority, but we had increased the amount of fines for 100% with respect to the last year. So this was something that produced results. Unfortunately, in Montenegro and Western Balkans in general, only repressive measures are producing results. As much as we try to be preventive for the basic fundamental rights of workers, we have to act repressively. The problem of non-registered works, we have certain sectors which are specifics. We have certain entities who are operating without any registration. For example, we find a natural person which is engaging other natural persons. Our labor law does not give us competencies. Then we have to cooperate with other inspectors. We're talking about the hairdressers, auto mechanic shops, many other forms of crafts or small services. So there is a big space for improvement, of course. Also in tourism, especially during the summer season, tourism season, where we have a lot of natural persons who are renting apartments, and they are not accessible to us for control. So in this respect, of course, we are cooperating with other inspections, primarily with the trade inspection, because trade inspection should register all these unregistered entities, and then we can control them whether they comply with the workers' rights. Also sanitary hygiene inspection, then tourism inspection, local inspection when we are talking about the renting of apartments during the summer season. We have very close cooperation with those inspections, with the tax authority. The tax authority is providing us with a lot of data. It's very important to change the law on inspection, because we want to be able to enter flats, condominium flats. According to the Constitution, we have the prevention of entry into the people's homes or flats, so we cannot enter into the flats as inspectors without prior consent of the court. So in the last 5 years, we have been talking about changing the law. So this is a big step. This would be a big step forward for all the different inspections, not just the labor inspection. So we are trying to change the law, the labor law, because natural persons are very often performing some business activities, and we cannot issue fine to a natural person, you know, unless that person is changed or the labor law is changed. Yeah. We have to change the labor law in terms of the labor contracts. According to the current state of play, employer is obliged to register employee 8 days from the day of signing the labor contract. And this is always giving this flexibility of this labor, this 8 days. So whenever we are controlling somebody, they are always signing the contract on the day they are controlled by the inspection. We should change the law like in other EU member states, so that all the persons before and starting to work, they have to have a labor contract. We don't have enough time for all this. Regarding informal employment, I just want to say that it's important to work on increasing the number of inspectors. We have huge competencies. The number of companies is increasing in Montenegro with respect, in last 2 years, from 22 to 24, the number of companies has increased for 15,000 companies, according to the statistical office. And we have few inspectors. We are trying, of course, to give our best. We are hoping that the number of inspectors will be increased. So once we have better capacities, we will be even better. When it comes to cooperation with the colleagues and the ASAP project, this is very important. Through this ASAP project, we are hearing about different experiences, different practices. We are communicating with persons who are experts in their fields, and they are providing us with very valuable inputs. We have a table, and I'm monitoring a report which give us recommendations how to be more effective. So I'm checking this checklist, actually a table checklist. I'm checking it constantly. This is very valuable, especially study visits, when we can see how the inspections from other countries are operating. Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant. I do apologize if you can switch off mic. Okay. I feel sorry that I had to interrupt you, but that's the situation. I would just say that you underlined very well that the fight against non-registered work is actually a fight for the workers' rights as well. And I'm very glad that you have mentioned rural and urban areas, because, again, we have huge inequalities. Unfortunately, we did not talk about that, but I'm glad you mentioned that. And, of course, cooperation with your colleagues in other countries. Now, the last panelist, we will exceed time frame for 5 minutes. Valerie Morica, the higher expert for the social development of the World Bank for Europe and the Central Asia. Your focus is on the issues of social inclusion, especially Roma, young people, and on gender equality. And actually, you have a broader perspective of the situation in the Western Balkans. So, in a nutshell, if you can give us your assessment regarding the social inclusion of vulnerable groups in the region, and maybe just to give us 2 or 3 main recommendations. Unfortunately, just 5 minutes for you.
Thank you very much, and pleasure to be here, also among such clear voices for equality and inclusion. Maybe I start with, because I think maybe not everybody is really familiar with the World Bank. So we're an international organization, international financial institution, and a lot of times there's a perception that the World Bank is actually an American institution, but it's an international institution, and taken together, the European shareholders are the largest group of shareholders of the World Bank. So just to say, we're very committed to the EU agenda, the EU accession agenda in the Western Balkans. And I thought, in terms of your question, we have heard a lot about the kind of challenges, the inclusion challenges in the Western Balkans, and I just wanted to turn it a bit around. What are the opportunities? And I think we've heard also some elements there, but let me go through a couple of those. I think, very importantly,
the Western Balkans has an immense untapped growth potential, in particular in women, in youth, and in minorities. GDP could be up to 20% higher in the region if women participated in the labor market at the same level as men. So that's an enormous GDP growth potential you can tap into. For Roma, if we're closing the labor market gaps of Roma, and Jelko mentioned this as well, we could have a regional GDP increase of US dollars, and sorry, we're measuring in US dollars, of course. Regional GDP could be go up by 5 billion US dollars. That's enormous. And LGBTI, we have also data on that. We've measured the cost of exclusion of LGBTI in Serbia and North Macedonia, and collectively taken together, including LGBTI in the labor market in North Macedonia and Serbia, would increase GDP by 360 million US dollars. So these are numbers that speak a clear language. There is untapped potential here, and closing these gaps is a priority. A second important entry point for this agenda is migration, for inclusion. Migration, we have a large group workforce outside of the Western Balkans, and that is often portrayed as something negative, and of course it comes with negative sides, but there are important positive elements. If you have a diaspora outside of your countries, you can tap into the skills and the resources of this diaspora. And I think this is a really important dimension that is currently not leveraged sufficiently in the Western Balkans. There's a lot of opportunities there in terms of technical skills, in terms of innovation that this diaspora can bring back to the Western Balkan countries. There's a strong focus on ICT adoption in the Western Balkans and digitalization. These types of services create a much more transparent and a much more accessible access to vulnerable population groups if managed correctly. This is always the question, of course, if managed correctly, but there are solutions that can be found. And then, of course, tourism provides a huge opportunity for inclusion, including inclusive jobs, including jobs in lagging regions, currently lagging regions, and a potential for growth in these areas. Equally, the just transition processes are often viewed as a negative, and they need to be managed correctly in order not to disadvantage workers and communities. But they can, if resources are used in the most impactful manner, they can really ensure that investments are put into regions that are currently lagging behind, that are currently dying of labor loss and also out-migration. So I think there's a lot of potential that is important to remember. And the key kind of anchor that we can leverage, and that's how we are approaching this from the World Bank perspective, is really the EU accession agenda and the growth plan. We don't have to make the case for inclusion anymore. The case has been made by the EU to a certain extent. The question is, how can we operationalize this? And this is how we're looking at it. And I think there's a couple of key pillars that we should keep in mind. Number one, we really need sound evidence. This has been mentioned before. I will mention it again. And what I mean by sound evidence is not only data, baseline data. This is one key pillar, baseline data. For example, we're currently working on, together with the European Commission and UNDP, on an updated Roma survey in the Western Balkan countries to really understand how has the situation evolved since 2017 when we carried out the first ever survey. So baseline data is critical, but also evidence that gives us much more granular understanding how exclusion plays out. For example, we have had a situation in North Macedonia where we had reforms to the way social services are being delivered in a decentralized manner, and there were lots of labor market opportunities for women and also minority women in delivering care services. And we could only see from the data that women were not taking up these opportunities. The data didn't tell us why. And only by doing then tracer studies with women who did not take up the training opportunities or dropped out of the training or didn't take up the jobs? Did we understand where the blockages were? And that allowed us then to actually identify what solutions would need to be put in place. So I think being very kind of critical in our thinking in generating data and using that data then to inform policymaking is critical. Which brings me to the next pillar, systemic reforms, legal reforms. And this was also mentioned here on this panel. I think it's really important for us to use this EU anchor, the fundamental first principle, the fact that countries are being held accountable to move on the fundamentals agenda to really remove legal and policy barriers to the inclusion of vulnerable groups. I give you again an example of how this works out in reality in the work that I'm doing. In the case of Albania, for example, we've worked with the government under a development policy operation, which is an instrument we have for budget support, where we worked on reforming the procurement legislation so that all bidding documents had to include non-discrimination language and require bidders to adhere to non-discrimination principles. So this is such a kind of, let's say, maybe unexciting step when you hear about it, but it's such an important step to create the non-discrimination realities when you have the big contracts and you want to make sure that companies that adhere to these principles are selected and or companies are actually implementing these legislation in reality to be eligible. The third element I want to highlight, and Tanya, you mentioned this, I know, Tanya, you mentioned this, is when we look at investments, to be very critical about what it means for the inclusion agenda. So let's say electricity, you mentioned this, Tanya. What does it mean for women to actually be part of this important investment journey? And to not just say we're mainstreaming women, but to be very concrete. Where is the gap? What is the challenge? And then identify the actions that are relevant for this to happen, to close this gap, and have some indicators attached to this that allow us to measure, are we actually seeing women more in technical positions in energy companies or in leadership roles? And how are these actions that are being implemented playing out in reality? So I think these three elements are absolutely critical. Two more points. I know we're running out of time, but I think it makes no sense to not close with these 2 points. I think the role of CSOs, this was one key question here. The way we work at the World Bank is that we have a comprehensive engagement with civil society organizations through our stakeholder engagement work, which means for all investment projects that we have a mandatory stakeholder engagement framework in place. And so these are important moments where we hear the voices from civil society to understand what are the key issues when we, for example, start to invest in the energy sector, and what are the key dimensions that we need to include in the project design together with the government to overcome these challenges. To move past this kind of punctual stakeholder engagements, we are trying now to set up country stakeholder civil society platforms that allows a much more structured dialogue with civil society. For example, in Romania, we set up what we call the Roma Sounding Board, and we are working with Roma civil society organizations that are part of this platform to really discuss with them in a systematic manner our entire portfolio, and get upstream from them information on terms of issues that we need to pay attention to. So structured engagement with civil society organization, I think, not just in a punctual manner, but in a platform approach is absolutely critical. The second element, I think, for civil society that's absolutely important is the incubation of social innovation. A lot of the solutions are within civil society. Civil society is innovating a lot of the key solutions to some of the exclusion issues that we're seeing. And for players such as the World Bank and other international organizations and development partners to leverage the social innovation, to make it visible and to allow governments to scale that up is absolutely critical. So for us to work with all of you on social innovation, all of you civil society partners, is absolutely critical. And now my last point. We're moving all more towards a results-based approach. And I think this is a huge opportunity. We see that a lot of the investments on inclusion have been scattered a bit here and a bit there. We don't really see what is the sum of its parts. Moving towards a results-based approach to inclusion, where we have clear targets and clear outcomes and conditionalities, as you said, that need to be in a structured manner met to address exclusion challenges is critical. And to use now this time until the next EU financing period, for example, to leverage innovation, to very rigorously evaluate innovation that is happening, and to then have a clear understanding how we can bring this to scale, how we can translate this into policies, will be, I think, an important priority for all of us collectively here for the next 2 years. Thank you very much for your attention.
Zahvaljujem.
Thank you, Valerie. I think it's good for us to end on this note on opportunities and what we can do. Maybe it's good that we present and tell the decision makers what the GDP potential losses are unless our women and Roma people are not included in the labor market, unless diaspora is included. As for tourism, it has to be sustainable tourism and not what we see both in the on the Montenegrin coast and on the Croatian coast. I had to mention this. And when discussing reforms, those reforms have to be genuine reforms, not just reforms on paper, and need to be implemented in all our countries. This is a big challenge, and this should be done continuously and not from one government to another government. And I'll finish by indicating to continuous advising process and counseling process. And as for social innovation, I agree that the civil sector can offer many useful examples, but the problem, as you indicated, is to institutionalize this, to turn it into policies, and not just to be funded through projects. So now we have to finish. Unfortunately, we don't have time. Actually, we still have time for 1 or 2 questions. Please ask questions without long comments. Please take the floor.
Moje ime Ranka Mišić.
Ranka Mišić from the Republic of Srpska. I represent trade unions. I was the panelist yesterday. I have a specific question and comment for Mr. Srđan. The role of inspectorates and inspection service is very important for trade unions. They can have a great effect on social dialogue. We are often critical about the work of our inspectors. We are not happy with what they do, how productive they are. And we have the same problem that you spoke about. There is a lack of inspectors. And inspectors in our country are poorly paid, and so they are exposed to pressures which could be understood from one hand. I have a question for you. What would it mean if we would have sector-based collective bargaining agreements with which employers and workers would govern the labor relations? How would this encourage the labor inspectorate, and how would this contribute to the development of democratic relations in the labor market? Would that be a good solution? And if it would, can we expect the support from inspectors, and then maybe organize a regional meeting together with the social partners to discuss this topic that would benefit all stakeholders? Thank you. And one more question, and then we can move to answers. No other questions. Srđan, the floor is yours.
dobro, sam bi se i osvrnuo na ovo što ste...
I would just say something about what you said. The situation is similar in the region. Yes, the salaries, the wages of inspectors are not motivating for university graduates to apply for this job. The situation is highly concerning in coastal municipalities. We don't have a single applicant for the job of an inspector. Trade unions are very important to us. We have had exceptional cooperation with colleagues from Montenegro, especially with colleagues from the independent free trade unions of Montenegro. Their representative is here. We listen to them. We listen to the issues that they indicate when it comes to the rights of employees. We use them as inputs for us to act, how to use modest resources to organize our work in the best possible way. And trade unions are in the best position to tell us what employees are mostly concerned about, and we in Montenegro are open for cooperation. We have had this excellent cooperation with colleagues who are fighting hard for the rights of employees. You mentioned a sector-based collective bargaining agreement. I'm sure you meant branch-level collective bargaining agreement. We have some of those branch-level collective bargaining agreements. They mean a lot to us. They should be very detailed, but not all occupations, not all professions and industries are the same. There are some differences. In some industries, workers should be given bigger rights, but it's all the matter of bargaining and negotiation. The labor inspectorate supports those processes, and they will get our support. And of course, we'll participate in everything that is at the regional level. Thank you, Sergej. I would finish with one story. I used to work for the Ministry of Spatial Planning and Environmental Protection, and then at one point we were visited by a colleague, urban inspector from the UK, and then we asked him a question how they address the issue of bribing inspectors, and the guy from UK told us that he had such salary that it would be out of his mind to accept any bribe. So that's how good he was paid. So thank you all for your participation in this panel, and let us continue with our fight. Thank you very much, and let us continue with the joint declaration.
Evo, završili smo. Okay, we have concluded the 10th Western Balkan Civil Society Forum. I'm glad that a lot of you remained. Maybe you didn't have to fly or go away. So as I say, this is the Jubilee 10th Western Balkan Civil Society Forum. And I think at the very start, we should thank to all those who have worked very much to organize this event. And this means to Tsonka, to Nadji, to David and Judith for giving us opportunity to have this very well organized at a high level forum, and I hope the next will be as well. What I would also like to thank at the start is to technicians and interpreters for exceptionally good job done, because everything was working perfectly, and we have direct broadcasting of the work of the forum on our website, so a lot of people could get involved and watch what we were doing and discussing. And I hope that maybe some of the politicians actually saw what we were talking here, especially from the Commission, because they would be able to learn a lot and to get a lot of good info from the field. Regardless of that, I have to say that I'll be brief. In the draft of the declaration which you got and probably already have read, we were dealing with the key challenges in the region, underlying the need for cooperation and inclusion in order to achieve sustainable development and getting closer to the EU, especially within the enlargement process. We are sending the message to the Western Balkan countries to continue progressing in the negotiations, accession negotiations, in order to achieve measurable track records. We especially praise this date, 2030, because we are convinced, and in all GCCs fora which we participated before, we clearly said that it's very important that accession dates into the EU are not postponed constantly, because in that way EU is losing credibility, and that is something which is not okay. Especially if we have in mind European values. Within the European values, we underline the importance of strengthening democratic resilience of the region and including social partners, CSOs, respecting diversities and improving state of play for social cohesion, preventing discrimination and social dumping. Within the growth plan and reform agenda, we can say that acceleration of the regional growth plan, including development of the regional common market, promotion of green, clean industries, and increased digitization, as well as priorities to invest into infrastructure, stimulating innovation and capacities for sustainable development, especially in the area of transport. Within the social justice and gender equality, we are supporting workers' rights fully, reducing the gender gap, especially in terms of salaries, increasing the participation of women in politics and high-level positions, and suppressing and countering gender-based violence. When it comes to the vulnerable groups, and that is what we have discussed today, we are giving special focus on inclusion of young women, vulnerable women, elderly, minorities, and persons with disabilities. We are underlining the importance to improve access to education, healthcare, and employment for these vulnerable groups through ensuring their full inclusion into the society. Countering unregistered irregular work is what we discussed today, and it's very unregistered work is still a huge challenge here in the region. Our forum is inviting for adopting strategies which are including tax incentives and simplified procedures for employment and for improving social protection of workers. And finally, what is the most important probably, social partners and CSOs are playing key role in promotion of social and economic convergence of the region with the EU. EU is invited to increase support to all the actors, stakeholders, both social partners and CSOs, in order to achieve cooperation between different institutions, local communities, and all other stakeholders. The fora underlines that social partners and CSOs are the key enablers of change, enabling sustainable and inclusive development in the region. So this is a brief summary of the declaration which you have before you, and you probably have possibility to read it. If you agree, I would now kindly ask to adopt this declaration as a joint declaration, and this declaration will be not only posted on our website but also disseminated and to all the European institutions. And national governments will receive the same declaration as well. And I think this is only right to do so, because this fora is not intended to only to us. We want politicians to hear what civil society is thinking, and what is asking them to do. So if you agree, I would kindly ask you to formally adopt the declaration. Thank you. What we always do at the very end is a family photo, so I would kindly ask all of you who are still with us, to come here at the stage to have a family photo, not as a memory, but as encouragement for the next 11th Fora of the Western Balkan Civil Society. Thank you.